A very good morning and many thanks for staying with us right here on NTV Uganda. My name is Roma Bisiku, and of course I'm coming to you yet again with another pertinent conversation, the Universal Periodic Review. The Universal Periodic Review is a mechanism through which the United Nations Human Rights Council assesses the human rights situation in each UN member state, Uganda inclusive in that regard, to push these governments to adhere to the obligations that they actually conformed to in order to uplift the human rights situation within those particular countries and also share best practices in that regard. This review is also based on the UN Charter, the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and so many treaties that these countries are party to. And of course, to make sense of this, today being Thursday, 27th, 2022, we do expect the Universal Periodic Review session to be taking center stage around 11 a.m. all the way to 2:30 p.m. So as a preamble to talk about this and a lot more, I do have Robert Chirenga, the Executive Director for the National Coalition for Human Rights Defenders right here in Uganda. He's not alone. He's also joined by Miss Ida Nachiganda. She is the Director, that is Complaints, Investigations and also Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. We also have a police officer, that is Dr. John Kamya. He is the in charge for human resource at the Uganda Police Force, with whom we are going to be taking a look at what is happening as far as the UPR is concerned. A very good morning. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
Good morning, Romeo.
Thank you for joining us, Ida and John Kamya.
Thank you.
Morning, Romeo.
Let me start with you, Mr. Robert Chirenga. What is the Universal Periodic Review? Why is it so important for our viewers to know about it?
Thank you, Romeo. The Universal Periodic Review is a unique mechanism under the United Nations system for protecting and promoting human rights. It was created under the UN General Assembly resolution that established also what we call the Human Rights Council, which is formed of 47 countries. And basically, the UPR is about how countries review their peers, in other words, member states within the UN system, on how far they've gone in fulfilling their human rights obligations. So why is it unique? It's unique in a sense that a country like the smallest country, maybe Tuvalu, and the United States of America or Russia or China are all treated as equal countries.
Indeed.
And that's what makes it unique, that any country can make recommendations to the other in terms of how it feels or thinks that the human rights situation in that country can be improved. So it's up to this country who is receiving the recommendation to either accept, or what we call support the recommendation, or to take note of the recommendation.
And of course, in the last Universal Periodic Review that was in 2016, it was around, was it November? It was around November 3rd. It was a Thursday. Yes, in 2016. Uganda accepted 143 recommendations. We deferred 18 and rejected 65. The ones we rejected, weren't they equally as important?
Yes, and we are advised as stakeholders, be it civil society and other actors, to take particular interest in those recommendations that states take note and have not supported. It means maybe there could be some issue, and therefore there's nothing that should deny you to continuously engage with other partners to see whether you can convince or persuade a country to take on. Remember, the UPR is a voluntary process.
Indeed.
So states are not forced to participate in it, but because you have accepted as one of the civilized member states of the United Nations to come in and see how you can work on those recommendations.
Well, of course, Robert, Uganda and particularly the government, NRM, has made some particular strides when it comes to the promotion and upholding of human rights within our country.
Yes,
Paint for us a picture of how human rights have been upheld right here in Uganda since 1986 up to date.
Correct. Since 1986, I think progressively we've seen this country come up first with a constitution that has a whole Bill of Rights under Chapter 4.
The longest.
The longest. That provides a range of all civil, political, socio-economic, cultural rights, and the group rights, environmental rights, and the right to development. We are also seeing almost all treaties, human rights treaties, being signed and ratified by the government of the Republic of Uganda. But it's one thing to sign, it's one thing to have a good constitution or a progressive constitution, and another thing to implement that constitution. So there are still some gaps. Yes, we've made some strides. We have many laws, the Human Rights Enforcement Act, the Anti-Torture Law, the Human Rights Commission Act, and many others that really show progress in terms of the legal regime.
Indeed.
But now you need to also assess the implementation of those laws and policies and see whether we are making progress, or is it a case of one step forward or two steps backward? Yeah.
In terms of implementation, do you feel like we are making any progress, Robert Chirenga? You've just come out of a campaign period where you saw political opponents being jailed, supporters being beaten, left, right and center, others being killed, 54 in 2020 and counting. Are we really making progress, Robert Chirenga, based on these factors I've just mentioned?
Those are the challenges that we are really grappling with, especially when we are addressing political questions.
Indeed.
Each time this country has gone to a round of elections every 5 years, you see what happens.
Indeed.
So those are the very challenges that we need to address, and these are not only human rights violations, but because they are also abuses by private individuals who commit these human rights abuses. So what does that mean? That we still have a lot to do, and really you see, the responsibility to protect and promote human rights lies on every citizen of this country. However, the primary responsibility lies on the state, and that is to say that the state has the obligation to respect, to protect and fulfill human rights. To respect means that it will not interfere with the enjoyment, with the rights of Romeo when he wants to enjoy it. It shall not. It shall protect Romeo when any other third party comes in. And of course, to fulfill human rights means that the state has to create an enabling environment for all of us to enjoy these rights. So it's very key that we as citizens, as human rights claimers, should be able to hold the state accountable where we have duty bearers.
Indeed.
Where our colleague Dr. Kamia, as a police officer, when they have issues of human rights violation, we should be able to remind them that they have an obligation to respect, to protect and fulfill.
The good thing he's in our midst. And of course, this is Robert Chirenga, the Executive Director for the National Coalition for Human Rights Defenders, right here in Uganda. You cannot compare the Museveni regime or the NRM regime to the past regimes. That is the Obote regime, the Amin regime. Between 1966 all the way to 1986, over 800,000 Ugandans died, yes, during those heinous administrations. But when Museveni came around in 1986, we have seen at least, yes, an effort to ensure the upholding of human rights and the protection of the same, despite the gaps that we've just mentioned in my preamble as I was kicking off this show. In our midst, we also do have Nachiganda Ida, Miss Nachiganda Ida. She is the Director for Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And of course, Ms. Nachiganda Ida, the Uganda Human Rights Commission is so pivotal when it comes to the promotion and the protection of human rights. What is the role of this commission in the UPR process, the Universal Periodic Review? Entice us with those details.
Thank you, Romeo. The Uganda Human Rights Commission, as we all know, is the national human rights institution of the country, established under Article 51 of the Constitution.
Indeed.
So, like you've rightly noted, the Commission plays a pivotal role in the protection and promotion of human rights. So when it comes to the UPR process, of course, the Commission has to play a very active role, one of which is we also submit a report as the National Human Rights Institution, and this report is based on our findings as a result of executing our mandate to monitor the human rights situation in the country. And our report takes note of the positive strides that have been taken in as far as the recommendations that were made in the previous UPR, the 2016 UPR, are concerned. And also it points out the areas where the country is still facing some challenges in terms of implementing those recommendations. The National Human Rights Institution, which is the Uganda Human Rights Commission, also has a role to play in monitoring the government in as far as implementation of those recommendations is concerned. Where the government takes on particular recommendations, like Bob has said, we then start monitoring how government is faring in as far as implementing those recommendations is concerned. The Commission also plays a role in actual implementation of recommendations. We've had recommendations where the state is required to, for example, train security agencies in ensuring that they protect and promote human rights as they are implementing their specific mandates. So the Commission has played a very active role in training security agencies, be it the Uganda Police Force, be it the Uganda People's Defense Forces, Uganda Prison Services, and we've trained them when it comes to the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, the provisions of this law. We now have the regulations that were passed in 2017, the regulations to the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, which regulations are supposed to provide a framework for the implementation of this law. We've trained...
Are you concerned that it has largely not been implemented since 2017?
I would not want to say largely not implemented. Steps have been taken towards the implementation of the law, but there are still challenges because this law criminalizes torture. And so we would want to see more perpetrators facing the law. We would want to see more perpetrators being held accountable.
There was a recommendation either in 2016. It came out. We are still actually voicing it as another recommendation moving forward to the third cycle. What has been done since then to ensure that these perpetrators are brought to book?
We've... I would want to say that we've seen courts of law playing a very active role towards the implementation of the PPTA, holding individual officers accountable. Although we would want to see more being held accountable, because our statistics, let me say the statistics of the Commission show that the act of torture is still a problem in this country. So where we have more cases being reported, we would want to see more individual officers of the Uganda Police Force, the UPDF, the Uganda Prison Service being held accountable. These institutions, though, have taken positive strides towards ensuring that their officers toe the line or work within the law in place. We know that the Uganda Police Force now has a human rights policy. I know Afande, Dr. Kamia is going to talk about it.
He's going to.
And that policy is intended to ensure that police officers really do their work within the human rights framework of the country. We know that the UPDF has a human rights training manual, and this is intended to ensure that the officers are trained in as far as the basics of human rights are concerned. Uganda Prison Service has embedded the human rights principle within their laws, within their policies. So positive strides have been taken, but more needs to be done.
Let me take you to the Kayunga by-election. I'll take you back to the 2020 campaigns. You saw how, the heavy-handedness that police was conducting itself, dispersing these protests and sometimes the campaigns that were taking center stage. What do you make of that, the heavy-handedness of the police force? Isn't it a concern of the Uganda Human Rights Council?
It is a concern, and what the Commission does is to engage the authorities concerned. We believe engaging goes a long way in ensuring a change in attitude. Romeo, you know that change does not happen overnight. It takes time. So with this particular conduct, it requires a change in attitude. And as a Commission, we are going to continue because we need to equip our officers with skills on how to do their work in an alternative way than that they're used to. How do they extract information without resorting to torture? How do they control gatherings, mass gatherings, without resorting to excessive use of force? So that requires engagement, and like I've said, attitude doesn't change overnight. It changes over a period of time. We would also like to take note of the commitment that has been expressed, let me say, through His Excellency when he has been addressing the nation and condemning acts of torture. I think that goes a long way to send a message to the actors, the security agencies, the law enforcement agencies, that they need to do their work within the human rights framework. But indeed, it is a point of concern where excessive force is used, and as a result of excessive force, people suffer injuries, and at worst, people lose their lives, like we saw during the November 2020 riots.
All right. There were also efforts to improve the juvenile justice system, whereby you had young people who committed minor offenses, but they were being jailed with the adults. This was a recommendation made in 2016. Is it still a concern right now? Are we still having minors being incarcerated with older or adults?
As a commission that is mandated to inspect places of detention, I must say that it is still a point of concern. However, efforts are being made to build more remand homes, so that we do not have adults being incarcerated with juveniles. So I think the issue is we need to build more remand homes, but also we need to see how best we can divert these juveniles from, how do we reform them instead of incarcerating them. Sometimes the methodology of reform, especially of these are children, may prove a bit better than incarcerating them, where they may be hardened, if I may say that. So there's still some challenges being faced.
Well, of course, if you've just joined us on this conversation, we're talking about the Universal Periodic Review. Thursday is the day of the reckoning, when we expect this session to actually flag off at around 11 a.m. all the way to 2:30 p.m. They shall be assessing the human rights situation of Uganda. It won't be Uganda alone. We have Togo in there, we have Venezuela in there, we have Syria in there, we have Southern Sudan in that same group, and they will be assessing the human rights situation within those countries. Our first Universal Periodic Review cycle came through in 2011. It was a Tuesday. Yes, 2011, around October. Our second one came in 2016. It was a Thursday. Third, around October of the same year, 2016. And the third one is today. Look forward to that around 11 a.m. all the way to 2:30 p.m. But for now, to talk about the outcome of this session, I do have Robert Chirenga, the Executive Director for the National Coalition for Human Rights Defenders Uganda, Miss Ida Nachiganda, the Director Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and we also do have a police officer, Dr. John Kamia. He is the in charge for human resource at the Uganda Police Force. Let's talk about why issues of torture have persisted among our very good police officers. Very good morning, sir.
Thank you.
Why do you hate journalists so much? Let me start with that question.
No, we don't hate journalists. They are our partners, they are our friends.
You've beaten us up, you've roughed us up, but all we do is disseminate information. Let me start with that. The journalists, we are your cadres, we are your friends, but what I've seen on the ground, you are roughing us up very badly. We are like the opposition.
There have been instances of journalists being roughed up by some police officers, and the police has always come out clear and say that is regrettable.
Indeed.
You know, law enforcement is a very difficult thing, and it's action. You are in the theater, and you are having so many people in the theater. Some are enforcers, some are the people you are trying to enforce.
Indeed.
So some things which happen there, some can be appropriate, others may go beyond the acceptable levels. But what is important is, does the police bring to book those who kind of go into excesses? Because I will tell you, Romeo, that the police has a total of about 50,000 police officers.
Indeed.
And if you equated it to a family, if you are the head of the family and your children are 50,000, it's very difficult that all the 50,000 will be compliant of the standard of behavior that you want them to do.
Well, let me just talk about the head of these 50,000 police officers, the head of the family. Mr. Ochola, the IGP, he came out and said during the campaign period, we shall beat you if you go there to protect you. During the campaign period, you remember that statement?
Maybe it was misunderstood, because the issue is everybody who is doing their work must be protected. And but you know, as I told you, there is a very thin line in law enforcement.
Indeed.
Because as you hear it, it's enforcement. So there is some kind of forcing people to do what is right. And sometimes you are telling somebody that this is taking you into danger, and just like children, this is taking you into danger. Child wants to touch fire, and then sometimes you beat the fingers because you are telling the child where you are going is fire. But the policy of the force, as far as journalists are concerned, is that we are partners, we are friends, and we all have a duty to do to the public, and everyone should be left to do their work.
That's what we thought, and the recommendation came out in 2016. They said, let the journalists do their work. Do not rough up the journalists. But what I saw during the campaign period, 2020, I'll even take you back to 2018 when we were in Arua, the Bobby Wine fracas, we were also roughed up. 2020 here, we were also roughed up. We were considered opposition journalists.
What happens is that when such instances, when such operations end, we do an after-action review. If there are some excesses, we bring those who went into excesses to book. And also we start factoring some of these issues into our training and education. For example, media relations, so that the police officers can understand the role of the media. And then we come up with the standard operating procedures on how to deal with these kind of people. So what is important now is when these things happen, do they just lay back or police take some action? Because every day is a learning lesson, and we continue improving. Yeah.
But why has torture also persisted within the ranks?
Just as I told you, it's a matter of training. It's a matter of, these are new laws that have come up, and it's a matter of making the police officers aware. And also it comes to the matter of, does the police punish those who torture? I was looking into the statistics before I came here, and I was seeing that in last year alone, the police disciplinary court conducted and concluded 254 cases of disciplinary offenses, and many of them were torture, and sometimes we charge them of discreditable conduct where the evidence is not upcoming, because when you go into criminal prosecutions, sometimes things are difficult because you must bring witnesses, and most times people are not there, and these are offenses that are committed not in the public.
Witness protection law is so
does it even exist? I think it's just in the offing. So sometimes we just take them on disciplinary, but we concluded 254, and around 200 and around the same number we are still they are still in the courts of law. The only thing is that sometimes we may not, for us, the way we do things, most government agencies, when we do things, we don't broadcast, we don't announce, we don't come to tell you now we have convicted the other man. For us, we know we have cleaned our house, and action has been taken, and that's the way most government agencies work. A lot of work is being done inside there, but we don't come to NTV and broadcast.
But that should be the way to go. You publicly shame these perpetrators so that those who would want to step into their shoes actually step back, and they're like, I won't do it because I'll be publicly shamed. But if they go silently, other perpetrators will do it. If they know it's the disciplinary committee and things are just handled silently, then I'll be off the hook.
Unfortunately, that's the characteristic of most government agencies. That's how we behave. If you do so much everything in the media, you tend to lose focus, and somehow the system will tell you, please, you are not playing to the gallery, please play within the rules. So unfortunately, that's the behavior of most government agencies.
Dr. Kamia, I did talk about the journalists, but also human rights defenders bore the brunt of the brutality of the police force. Let's talk about that a lot more. Even society organizations, the NGOs that were working to uphold and improve human rights were also, roughed up by members of the security. Why is that still happening?
What we can say is that there are some instances where they get roughed up. Because, as I told you, it's very difficult to have a system completely clean. Even when you compare ourselves to the European countries, even USA, those problems of police excesses will always be there. And the police officers will tell you that the situation starts very calm, but the way it escalates it depends on the circumstances that come into play within there. So the issue is trying to continue telling people, telling our officers how to control the situations, not to escalate. And what will benefit a lot from these UPR recommendations is, like, for example, they recommended entrenching human rights, as Ida said, into the training curriculum we put. And they say put structures for enforcement. So right now, then we restructured the police organizational structure. We established a Directorate of Human Rights and Legal Services with human rights officers going down to the regions and the districts. We established the Professional Standards Unit that brings those who go into excesses to, because it's very important. If I'm a human rights defender in Karamoja and I'm violated, is there somewhere I can go, or I have to go all the way to Kampala? So when the police comes up and puts a structure where there is a human rights officer at headquarters at the region, so then you are giving all these defenders where they can go. And then eventually the police comes up with a human rights policy and says, for us, this is our policy. So the reference is, what does the police policy say? It says respect rights of everyone. So if some officers now go beyond, then we have an instrument, a tool from where we can bring them to book. And that's the most important. Putting the structures. Now all those structures are there. Now we have a policy. We even have a gender policy, which is also a human rights issue to address issues of women and equity and equality.
Child and Family Protection Unit.
Child and Family Protection Unit is there to address. So the structures are there. And now we just need to work together now to make those structures work.
Indeed. And of course, NMJ gives credit where it is due. The presence of Dr. Kamia is testament that the state is actually very, very much committed to the promotion and upholding of human rights in that regard. Your presence here alone is testament to that. But from this view of the state, how do you see the UPR process? Is it important?
It's very important because it brings us to account. When they say Uganda is being reviewed, Uganda is not the air you see around. Uganda is people, Uganda is institutions. So when they are reviewing, they are actually reviewing the institutions, they are touching issues of the police. And when they make recommendations, we pick them up and we improve. All these things I've talked about, putting structures, entrenching human rights into the training curriculum, we have recommendations from the UPR and from the Human Rights Committee before the UPR came on board. And we really benefit a lot. And what I need to tell you is, when the Minister of Foreign Affairs takes a delegation, goes with delegation to, before they go with the delegation to Geneva, there's a lot of work that is done here. All of us, the MDAs and ministry and agencies are always called to answer to these questions, and we respond. And so that process alone is a kind of cleaning up, and then the system says, but you know, here I think this must be improved. So a lot of work is done before the delegation goes, and also the minister doesn't go alone. He goes with us. He goes with the police, the military, the Minister of Gender officials, and sometimes during the actual session, when some questions come, of course, the minister is the chairperson, the head of the delegation. But he usually says, police, can you respond? Prisons, can you respond? And we really respond. Now, that level of accountability is very important, because when we come back, we are able to say, you people, these questions are coming up. When we are talking to our officers, these questions are coming up at the international level, so we need to improve them. So it's quite an important thing. And also, these structures I told you, the human rights policies, they come out of those recommendations. So it improves the system seriously.
And of course, we also do know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a docket of human rights in its coffers. We also do know that the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs also has a desk human rights officer in that regard.
And Ramyo, to tell you actually,
yes, John.
One time we were in the Universal Periodic Review, and they recommended, I think we are in the Human Rights Committee when we are reporting under ICCPR, and they recommended that Parliament, there should be a Human Rights Committee of Parliament. It wasn't here. It was a recommendation. We came back, we told government this is what people say. And within a year or two, there was a Human Rights Committee in Parliament.
Indeed.
So this process works to improve systems.
And indeed, we are still magnifying on the significance of the Universal Periodic Review. Uganda is undergoing its third cycle review, the first one being in 2011, the second one around 2016, and the third one is today from 11 a.m. when we leave these studios all the way to 2:30 p.m. For now, let's take a breather. We'll return shortly with more of these deliberations. Keep around. At 10:34 a.m., you're still watching NTV Uganda. The conversation is largely focused on the Universal Periodic Review. Uganda underwent the first cycle in 2011, around October. It was a Tuesday, the 11th. And also in 2016, it was a Thursday, around the 3rd, this same month, around November in 2016. Now we are talking about the third cycle of the UPR mechanism in that regard. What should we look forward to? What recommendations were made in 2016 by the civil society actors like the National Coalition for Human Rights Defenders in that regard? I have the Executive Director, Robert Chirenga. He's still here. We also still do have the Director, that is Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission, Ms. Ida Nachiganda. She's still here. And also from the Uganda Police Force, we still do have Dr. John Kamya, the in-charge for human resource at the Uganda Police Force. Let's continue talking about advocacy and the importance or significance of the UPR process with Robert Chirenga. Robert, a very good morning once again. Yes, I understand the UPR mechanism is very good for advocacy, I imagine. What are some of those recommendations that have been made in the past by civil society organizations like the Uganda National Human Rights Coalition?
Sure. Some mainly got to do with protecting human rights defenders and the work that they do.
Indeed.
That the state should legitimize the work of human rights defenders in terms of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights and Responsibilities of Human Rights Defenders and come up with a law.
We are not the enemy.
Yes, that we partners. Two is what we do, civic space. There are
50 NGOs shut down.
Exactly. To be able to participate in the governance affairs of our country, the right to association, the right to peaceful assembly, the right to freedom of expression. And of course, there were other issues that arose like torture and coming up with a law on torture, which I think we've made progress on in terms of having that law in place. Continuous funding or adequate funding to the National Human Rights Institution. That's the body that's supposed to be protecting me and you.
Indeed.
And of course, we had also to do with the laws in terms of electoral reforms, especially the citizen participation in the electoral management body. That the appointing authority of commissioners of the electoral management should be opened up to public scrutiny so that it is seen to be independent and not partisan. So those are some of the issues, but they are broad spectrum.
Indeed.
Now, one thing I must emphasize is that civil political liberties or civil political rights are given equal weight to socio-economic rights.
Indeed.
So we can't say that these recommendations which are under civil political rights carry more weight than those in socio-economic rights.
They all carry weight.
They all carry the same weight. So the broad spectrum of it. There's even transitional justice. You know that in northern Uganda we have children who are stateless.
Indeed.
About 500 are now adults.
My mother died in the war. My father died in the war.
I'm a product of rape.
Indeed.
I don't know who raped me, so we can't
No
tell.
birth certificate, so I can't get a national ID.
Exactly. And without a national ID in this country, you know what it means.
Indeed.
So those are questions
So
that
we
are
have
grappling with.
citizens who are stateless within their own country.
Especially from northern Uganda. So those are issues that you need to grapple with. And of course the civic space. Because when you look at the National Development Plan 3, it emphasizes the role of civil society organizations. Under Chapter 19 that talks about the whole pillar on governance and security, recognizes participation as a very key ingredient if we are to make development successful. So if you continue squeezing civil society, you close their funding modalities like democratic governance facility. So you're trying to say citizens cannot participate. And yet at the same time, you're contradicting yourself. Article 38 of the Constitution talks about the right to participate in the governance of but then you have also an NGO bureau that is supposed to be an enabler. But sometimes the way it acts it seems that it's disabling civil society participation. So those are the kind of recommendations we want.
And you're not alone on the issue of the NGO Bureau. Even the Uganda Human Rights Commission came out and said, well, the NGO Act has to be checked so that it actually acts based on international standards in that regard. Let's talk about a recommendation that came out in 2016. The Supreme Court ruling that recommended that we should be actually allowing all political actors to access airtime freely, you understand, on public stations in that regard. But what we saw during the campaigns were radios being switched off when politicians were actually on those radio stations. Patrick Amuriat, Robert Chagulanyi, they suffered the same fate. This has continued and was never implemented. Are you worried that it shall continue the same way?
Yes and no. I think part of this is we need to really hold state actors accountable. I would like to engage with the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation because that's a public broadcaster, unlike NTV. So it must treat every citizen who comes there equally. And
the funny bit is that NTV gave, you know, a platform to all these politicians, unlike the state broadcasters. Yes. They didn't do it.
That's true, and I think it has to do more with the security of tenure of the public servants there.
I see.
If I give
partisanship.
Yes. If I give, not about partisanship. If I give audience to this, what is the likelihood that I will be still be in office?
Repercussions.
Reprisals. You've had reprisals when journalists even cover something and say you embarrass the state actor. And therefore you are either suspended or you are going to... So those are the issues. Do the public servants in the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation enjoy security of tenure?
Who are also
so that they can be able to follow the law as it is. So those are questions, because he will not do that because one, security of tenure means livelihoods are affected. He has a family to feed. So those are the kind of things that so institutional building is very key.
And the issue of regulating campaign funding, and how much you are supposed to spend during an election.
Exactly.
It came out as a recommendation in 2016 in the UPR, the working group recommendations, the report, I read it, but it has never been implemented. People are spending 2 billion, 3 billion, 10. It's heinous.
Yeah, because you can see really from the word go, the ground is not leveled. If you have an incumbent who has access, and is entitled to it because he's still a president, the law doesn't say you step down. He has to be protected. So you'll have all the security, he has all the facilities, unlike others. Maybe it has to do with the electoral reforms. On can a sitting president campaign at the same time as any other president? What are the merits and demerits? I think that's the thing that citizens should be engaging in, especially at the level of parliament, and see how do we ensure that the ground is leveled. And that comes back to a recommendation also by Sweden and the United States of America in terms of the electoral management body, the Uganda Electoral Commission. How can we see that it's an independent body? We're saying, in terms of the appointing authority, who should appoint commissioners to the electoral?
It shouldn't be a runner-up in the
Should you and I participate in other words, can they apply for those jobs? And we also provide information to those who are going to subject them to public scrutiny.
So these countries felt like it is not right for Museveni being also a candidate in an election, being the
and having appointed the chairman and his commissioners.
Indeed. It compromises the integrity of the whole institution.
Yes,
all right, let's also bring in Ms. Nachiganda Ida, the Director Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Recommendations were made in 2016. You also were concerned about the NGO Act. You wanted it tweaked so that it reaches international standards. What was the main contestation from the Uganda Human Rights Commission on the NGO Act?
The main contestation really was the methodology of registration.
I see.
And just to ensure that these civil society organizations are working in an environment that is ideal for them to do their work. The levels of compliance when it comes to registration, but also the monitoring of their work. There's these two words of civic space that they should be able to operate in an environment that allows them to monitor monitor the government projects, monitor the government's obligations and the implementation of its obligations in a way that their work is not being fettered. So the issue here was, are they able to register as civil society organizations? Are they able to operate without any hindrances? Of course, operating within the legal framework, because that is the issue here, that there are laws in place that these civil society organizations are supposed to comply with.
And it seems like it is getting worse. Miss Ida, 54 NGOs were shut down. That is last year in August. That is a couple of years after you made that recommendation. Are you concerned that moving forward we are going to see an even shrinking civic space moving forward?
Well, moving forward, and it's good that we're having the UPR right now.
Indeed.
And the UPR, like Dr. Kamya said, is an accountability mechanism. So we now expect to hear from the government. Of course, the questions are going to be asked in Geneva about these 54 NGOs and why is it that they were closed. I think it's very important to keep the engagement or communication lines open. And not for one side to wonder what is going on, and the other side is not providing the information. It's important to keep the engagement and the communication lines open, so that where one side, in this particular case, the civil society organization maybe is lacking a document, maybe forgot to comply with a particular procedure, they are told so that they can make it right. Yes.
The issue of the death penalty, it came out in 2016. A country like the United Kingdom came out and it was concerned. It was like it has not been abolished in its entirety. What is it being done to ensure that we do away with the death penalty? Bring us up to speed with those details, because we do have a president who is breathing fire and is saying he wants to resuscitate the same and hang people.
Well, the death penalty is still on our law books. And the recommendation to the government of Uganda has been, first of all, to ratify the optional protocol to the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And now this particular optional protocol would require the state to abolish the death penalty. So Uganda is not yet a state party to the optional protocol, to the ICCPR, and I think engaged with the several actors are still engaging the state on the issue of the death penalty. Of course, we saw the court ruling that it's now discretionary, it's not mandatory for the judge to convict or sentence someone to the death sentence. These engagements are still being made. Advocacy efforts, civil society organizations are still stepping up their advocacy efforts on this particular issue. But like you've said, it's still on our law books, and that is still the biggest concern. Of
course, in 2016, the Uganda Human Rights Commission also urged the Law Reform Commission to actually tweak the laws on ending child marriages and teenage pregnancy. What were the main contestations on that issue? The main contestations on the issue with the Uganda Law Reform Commission and the court judgments or the court decisions is that we've had a number of court decisions by the Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court, that have declared particular sections of laws in this country unconstitutional. We've had laws, the Succession Act, certain provisions of the Succession Act, certain provisions of the Marriage Act, the Divorce Act, that have been declared unconstitutional because we have Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights that Bob talked about at the beginning, that endows us as citizens of this country with rights. And there are key provisions on discrimination
not discriminating on the ground of sex, not discriminating on the ground of disability. So where we have laws that, for example, that hinder a woman to inherit, hinder a woman to administer the estate of her late husband, that provide more grounds for me as a woman to prove in order to secure a divorce from my husband. Certain provisions have been declared unconstitutional, and we still have these provisions on our law books. So the recommendation to the Law Reform Commission has been that we need to remove these discriminatory provisions from our law books, because they are not in line with the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land.
And the international standards. Thank you so much, Ida Uganda. Let's also bring in Mr. That is Dr. John Kamya, the in-charge for human resource at the Uganda Police Force. Let's talk about the significant progress that you've been achieving since 2016. Uganda has undergone twice, you know, we've been reviewed twice since 2011, 2016. Have you noticed any significant positive strides being made by the Uganda Police Force as far as human rights promotion is concerned since 2016?
Yes, as I told you, we just had a small department of legal services before. Now we have a full directorate of human rights and legal services, and this directorate has been capacitated with officers. Government allowed us to recruit lawyers, whom we have posted to all regions of the country, about 30 regions, so they are there. We worked with the Uganda Human Rights Commission, HURINET, which is a civil society coalition of civil society organizations, and the British High Commission, and we came up with a human rights policy. So we came up with the human rights policy. That is very key, because that's institutionalizing now human rights. At least there is a policy which says you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't torture, which is institutional, not referring to international standards, and which is institutional. So we now have a policy within. We recently developed standard operating procedures on the use of force and firearms by police officers, standard operating procedures. So they are called SOPs. At least now the public is familiar with SOPs because of the COVID. These are always standard. When they say, do this, put on a mask, wash your hands, use sanitizer, those are standard operating procedures. So for us also, we have those on use of force. Don't do this, don't exceed this, don't exceed this. That's a lot of progress. And we have strengthened our, of course, we also have a gender policy, as I told you, which talks about issues of gender, to the extent that now when we are recruiting into the force, there is even quotas for women. When we are promoting, there is even quotas for women, and that's very important. And then, of course, we also human rights is now part of our training curriculum, and still worked with the Uganda Human Rights Commission to come up with a training manual, and it was a recommendation of the UPR of 2011. Yeah, 2011, and now we have a training manual and a training module on human rights. All these new recruits you see joining the police, you cannot become a police officer unless you pass that module. And if you fail it, you will have to retake, and if you can't pass it, then you don't become a police officer. So that is very important.
And of course, Dr. Kamya, before I let you go, child marriages have persisted, teenage pregnancies have persisted. Are you doing your job effectively?
Yeah, the police would wish to do its job, but some of these problems are not actually law enforcement problems. They are social problems. They are society problems. Because if...
When a mother comes to report a case and the police officer says you need to be paying for the money needed for investigations, is that a societal problem?
No.
Or an issue of corruption?
That shouldn't arise. The police is facilitated to do investigations. The problem would be if a mother comes to report and the police says this is not a police case, you go back. That one we handle.
And it has happened before.
Yeah, we handle. But we know that these cases are so rampant. If the dropout rate at primary and secondary level is still high, and then you have big percentages, you're not going to get all these kids into prison. And also the other problem that is there is that in many cases, also those who impregnate the girl, child pregnancies are also kids themselves. So they are fellow kids in secondary school, in primary school. So it's a societal problem. But for us as police, we continue preaching, because the Child and Family Protection Unit and the community liaison officers are charged with sensitizing the public about these things. So in one way of protecting the girl child is to sensitize parents and so on. But when these cases come, and then the parents are accomplices, and then they are trying to protect the the perpetrators and also their kids, it becomes problematic. So it shouldn't be looked at from the enforcement point of view only, but from also the social development point of view, of gender.
Dr. John Kamir, does the absence of this witness protection law make your work even harder?
Yeah, it's very hard, because witnesses must be protected. And where some witnesses are going to be intimidated, and you have had situations where the police tries to use this initiative to protect witnesses, and in court the other party will say, police, you were compromising the witness, you are even the one who kept her, so you influenced her. And then you are at a loss, because you don't have a law which now tells you can actually keep a witness. So where you don't have a good witness protection law, it becomes a problem. And it's not yet on our law books. Yeah, the proposal is there, the draft is there, but it has not been passed by Parliament.
All right, in the next 5 minutes we shall be concluding the show, and we shall be kicking off the session that will see Uganda review together with Togo, Venezuela, Syria, Southern Sudan, and many other countries in that regards. As the United Nations Human Rights Council assesses the human rights situation within those UN member states in that regard. Let's talk about the recommendations or the outcome of this session at around 2:30 p.m. when it ends. What should we expect at the end of this session? Robert Chirenga, expectations.
I imagine member states in the working group reviewing the country Uganda will raise some issues arising out of the last election we had in 2021 that were also raised in the last second cycle.
I need that document when it comes.
Issues to do with the enforced disappearances are likely to arise.
Indeed.
Issues of torture, issues of civic space, and issues to do with freedom, rather in terms of the National Human Rights Institution funding modalities, whether they have increased the funding, and of course law enforcement and accountability. Those who were seen by perpetrators of human rights violations and abuses, have they been taken before the courts of law? So those are issues that are likely to arise again.
Again, before we wrap up, parting shots, recommendations, outcomes of the session at around 2:30 p.m. when it ends. What do you expect to be the outcome of that? He has also preached too much about funding the Uganda Human Rights Commission on your behalf. You can also talk about that.
Just to say that progressively, government has increased the funding to the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and we are now at 80%, slightly above 80%. But ideally, it should be 100%. So I predict that may also come up once again as a recommendation. 100% funding to the NHRI. We also predict a recommendation on the government adapting the National Action Plan on Human Rights. It's yet to be adopted by Cabinet. And in light of the SDGs, leaving no one behind, we also predict a recommendation on government coming up with more interventions on ensuring the enjoyment of rights of vulnerable groups, women, children, and persons with disabilities. Children specifically within the COVID-19 context, the lockdowns and its effect on the right to education, especially for the rights of the special needs children. So that's our predictions, in addition to Bob's prediction on strengthening accountability mechanisms. Yes.
And with that, we've come to the end of this conversation. Many thanks to the viewer who has been watching. starting from 10 a.m. up to now. My name is Rome Busik. Of course, I've been with the Executive Director for the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda, Robert Chirenga, who was never alone in this studio. We also did have Miss Ida Uganda. She is the Director, Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And lastly, we did have Dr. John Kamya, the in charge for human resource at the Uganda Police Force. Gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for having made the time to speak to us on the Universal Periodic Review.
Thank you.
And of course, lastly, it is a mechanism through which the United Nations Human Rights Council assesses the human rights situation of each of the UN member states. My name is Romu Siku. We look forward to that encounter around 11 a.m. all the way to 2:30 p.m. Good morning.